Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Whiskey Business, the podcast not so much about whiskey as it is one with whiskey. Haven't even had a sip yet. Welcome to those who might be tuning in on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live as well. I am your host, Dino Tripodis, and tonight on the podcast, Todd Jones will be joining us. Award-winning sports writer, great writer in general. He's written about more than just sports, but he also has a new podcast called Press Box Access, which will be debuting on February the 17th on the Evergreen Podcast Network. We'll let him talk more about what that podcast will consist of. But if you are a sports fan and always wondered about that front row seat, what's the next best thing? Well, maybe the gentlemen who write about all our beloved games and sports, who are sitting there watching it firsthand and get to comment on some of the greatest sports stories of all times, those who were fortunate enough to be there. And I'm going to ask him about some of the lamest of all times as well, because, you know, there's a seesaw effect. You know, for everything that's great, there's got to be something lame. That in mind, let's talk about great and lame all in one fell swoop for just 1 second, and I'm sure we'll discuss it more with Todd a little bit. But I have so many questions for him. Super Bowl 55.
That's horrible.
Super Bowl 55. The much hyped matchup between 69-year-old Tom Brady and 17-year-old Patrick Mahomes. It was supposed to be quite the shootout, which it was not. First of all, congratulations to Tampa Bay. Their defense had Patrick running around wilder than somebody coughing on me at Kroger without a mask on. He was just all over the place. He couldn't go anywhere. So a tip of the hat to the Tampa Bay defense and to Tampa Bay for rallying in the middle of their season and becoming the Super Bowl champs. Champa Bay, as they're calling it now. Not a big salute to those who were celebrating afterwards in all the bars and restaurants, as if there was nothing going on in this country where they could catch a cold or worse. And in respects to Tom Brady, let me say this. As a mature, grown man who has respect and admiration for those who can do what I cannot, in any field for that matter, be you a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a professional athlete, a quarterback in the NFL, I have immense respect and admiration for what Tom Brady has done and what he apparently continues to do. 10 Super Bowls, 7 Super Bowl rings, 5 MVP awards. He has tossed his sling and arrows at my Pittsburgh Steelers while playing for the New England Patriots numerous times and have crushed my soul. So on that simple level, hats off to Tom Brady. As a cynical, petty man who is a Steeler fan, the hell with Tom Brady. Enough, Tom Brady. Seriously. 7 Super Bowl, 7 rings. One more ring than any other NFL franchise out there. I hated it when he tied. Yes, I'm a Steeler fan. I hated when he tied the Pittsburgh Steelers for most Super Bowl wins. And then he has to go off and just, win another one just for himself, whatever the case might be. I mean, how much longer does this go on? And does the man ever have a bad day? Is there such a thing as a bad day for Tom Brady? Does somebody actually have to pissing his cornflakes. And even if they did, he'd be like, joke on you. I don't eat cornflakes. I don't eat corn. I don't eat flakes. I don't eat whatever crazy the vegan diet that he's on. I just have to think that on some level, with everything that he does to stay in shape and to do what he does, that on some level he's got to be just miserable on some level. And then again, probably not. So I don't know about anybody else out there, but I feel better. So without further ado, let's get to our podcast tonight. I'm looking forward to talking with Todd Jones, who is our guest tonight. Like I said, new podcast called Press Box Access. Also has another podcast out there, 1 Degree Greater podcast. We'll talk about that. We've got lots to get into with Todd. But first, let me bring in the boys, John Whitney and Greg Hansberry.
Hello.
On the audio side, John Whitney on the video side. And Hansberry's got the, what is that, an OSU album in the background?
Yeah. Got the Buckeyes. Great Ohio State Memories. Volume 1.
Volume 1, because baby, there's tons of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tons of them. So, Hansberry, a little bit of business before we introduce the guest bottle tonight and move on to Todd.
That's right. Thanks for checking out Whiskey Business, everybody. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, thank you. Welcome. Feel free to go ahead and leave a comment or a question if you have a question for us or for Todd. We'll try to include them in the show the best we can. And while you're here, go ahead and like us and share if you haven't already done that. Click on the little subscribe buttons down here if you're on YouTube. We're also on pretty much every podcasting platform out there you can find. Go ahead and subscribe to us there. iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeart, I don't know, Disney Plus. I forget. I forget all the list of them.
Pretty much any place you get a podcast, you can get us.
That's right. And also all of our archives and everything else, whiskeybusinesspod.com. And John actually has a visual for us today for all of you on the social media live. So this is what it is. If you've never seen a website before,
that looks fancy and professional.
This is all of our archived episodes. You can watch the videos or you can listen to the audio. What else you got there? Clicks right to our social media accounts. Nice. Do some of the whiskey wisdoms there, John. Show them where they can watch those. Yeah, we've got goofy videos that John and Dino produced.
Yes, those were a blast to do. That was a long night.
I know, right?
That was a long night.
Of course, there's those. Look at that headshot.
Look at those people.
Damn, I look good.
Right. Okay.
That was literally the best hair day I've ever had in my life. That was
perfect. Not my worst, but and Whitney.
John, what's going on with you, Whitney?
I was pretentious that day.
Well, I was going to say.
Give me my black turtleneck.
Was that the opening of all your artwork at the Death Gallery?
Yes, it was. It was a good turnout that night.
It's good.
Well, anyway, there you go.
My heart is full of darkness, as is my turtleneck.
I'm an artist.
Yes, I know. Yeah, ridiculous. I know.
Steve Jobs. Eric Osbeck says, "Is that Steve Jobs?"
Oh man! Okay. Our guest bottle, our 154th bottle on the podcast tonight. Unlike the name filibuster, I will not be going on a long filibuster about this particular bottle, but it is a 90 proof dual cask straight whiskey. Bourbon from Virginia, filibuster, a dual cask meeting, of course, that first started in charred oak barrels, and then it rested in some California wine barrels as well before it came to us. It is 90 proof. It's supposedly known for its spiciness, but I find this one to be rather sweet with a lot of caramel, even though they tote and brag about the vanilla and the cocoa. I pick up more caramel in the filibuster than anything else. This is one of the many bottles that I scored on Thanksgiving when I was up in Tennessee that came from my very generous brother-in-law, who wanted. You got the Weller Special Reserve over there, and Hansberry. What do you got going on?
Watershed.
Watershed, nice. Staying local.
Yeah, I love. I'm really into the wine cask aged stuff. It just adds that really yummy maple sweetness to it.
Yeah, it does.
Big fan.
This one's very nice. It's very sweet, very smooth. Oh, and it retails for anywhere between. I've seen it somewhere between $48 and $53 a bottle.
That's reasonable.
So, if you want to pick it up and you got that kind of change, I don't think you'll be disappointed. In the filibuster from Virginia, from the Commonwealth of Virginia. This particular bottle is extremely suitable for the straight bourbon whiskey drinker.
I didn't think you were doing a filibuster tonight.
I was not doing a filibuster. There's a mini
settle in. You got the filibuster.
A filibuster. So, anyway. And our guest tonight is admittedly not a big whiskey drinker, and he kept expressing all that concern about it. And I said, you don't have to drink whiskey to be on Whiskey Business. You just have to be a good guest, which I know he's going to be, as we welcome Todd Jones, everybody. Todd Jones, there he is.
What's up, fellas?
Congratulations right out of the gate, sir. Let me say this, that you win the award for having the most books behind him of any guest we've ever had.
Nice.
Well, I got to say, most of these came with crayons.
Very nice. It looks very, very impressive.
Doesn't mean I read them. They just might be a display.
Oh, no. I know a little bit about you, aside from being a great writer and having an extremely long career.
Long.
I mean, 20 years at the Columbus Dispatch, 10 years at the Cincinnati Post. You're originally from Kentucky, which we will not hold against you.
Hey, watch it now.
They make good bourbon there.
But some work at the Lexington Herald, not to mention the dozens of periodicals and newspapers and magazines that you've written for over the years, primarily about sports, but you've also written about the human condition. That you've covered Hurricane Katrina. You've covered a lot of bases, but tonight we're going to stay in what we consider to be one of your favorite wheelhouses, that of sports and sports writing and Press Box Access, which is a new podcast getting ready to debut on February the 17th on the Evergreen Podcast Network. Tell us about Press Box Access before we actually dig into some of the minutia here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really excited about it. The show debuts next Wednesday, February 17th, and it kind of was an idea that I had for a book that I was kicking around because I've been out of sports writing for about 3.5 years now. And the things I was missing was just not so much the games or the players or the coaches, but just my friends in sports writing. And the idea that, we used to spend a lot of time on the road or in press boxes, just telling stories, catching up about things that they were covering or people that they had come across. And a lot of us just funny, behind the scenes type of stories. And what I realized is that a lot of those stories they're just entertaining for people who have never really had a chance to have the type of access that we had. So the idea basically is like, sit down, join us, think of it as a bar, coffee house, whatever you want it to be. And, we'll just tell you some stories that we used to tell each other, some of them that we never wrote about. And, not, it doesn't have to be salacious, but, sometimes it's just enlightening, funny things that happen behind the scenes. And I think people will enjoy it. So we've already taped 5 or 6 writers, and it's going to come out on the 17th. And every 2 weeks, there'll be a new episode. Writers from throughout the country who covered pretty much everything in the last 30, 40, even 50 years. So think of it as like an oral history.
Very nice.
Getting the tales of some of these writers before they head off into the sunset.
I have the trailer. Should I just play it right now?
Yeah,
sure.
Give it a little run.
All right, here we go, guys.
You've heard stories. Well, some of them. Jordan, Gretzky, Ali. Oh, there are stories. The Miracle on Ice. Secretariat at the Belmont. Duke, Kentucky. The catch, the drive, the shot. You want to hear what it was like to be there? Come behind the scenes. I'm Todd Jones. I was a sports writer for 30 years. traveled our nation and the world for major sporting events, wrote thousands of stories, collected many more. Join me on Pressbox Access, where you'll sit down with sports writers who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experience firsthand some of the biggest sports moments in the past half century. Let us buy you around on Pressbox Access. Coming to you from Evergreen Podcast in 2021.
Nice.
Boy, that sounds
Bravo, man.
professional.
Yeah. I point out that, Evergreen Podcast, I'm really fortunate to partner with them. As a former writer, I'm new to the audio world for the most part. And, teaming up with a network like that, it's really growing and full of professional people that know what they're doing. It's been a big help, and they've been great to work with. So I'm really fortunate.
Yeah, well, congratulations, and it's really something to look forward to. I want to just hit you right out of the gate with a question, something you just said kind of casually and threw it off. You've been out of sports writing, you said, for 3.5 years. Is a sports writer ever really, really out of sports writing? I mean, is it not something that stays in your blood and in your consciousness?
Yeah, I think you're right. I actually, now I've been working at Ohio State for the alumni magazine as a writer. But, if I see a story written by a friend, or I tune into a game, your mind just kind of goes back to what you did all those years. And it really happens at night. If a game is going on, as a newspaper guy, you were always on deadline at night, right? These games are going on, and your deadline might be 10:30, 11:30. And so even now when I'm watching a game, I keep checking the time on my phone. Like, how much time do I have? Because that's all you really thought about during the game, was trying to beat deadline. So I still have flashbacks. I like to say I'm a recovering sports writer.
There you go. That might be more accurate. And when you started your career in journalism, was it sports writing? Is that what you always wanted to be, was a sports writer?
Yeah. When I was growing up, I was played a lot of sports, was into it, and I liked to write. About halfway through college, I finally got my act together and started working for the student paper at the University of Kentucky. And I didn't know how to become a sports writer. I didn't know, it sounded great. And I just, I met some people, I got fortunate, got some experience. And early on, once I realized, hey, these guys are sitting in the front row at the greatest basketball game, and, and they're traveling on the road. This is back when newspapers had money and they'd send you everywhere. They're traveling per diem, and I'm like, well, this sounds like a pretty good life to me. It beats working. So I just kind of stumbled into it. And, once you got into it, it was almost like the mob. Once you were in, until you're not.
Yeah. Until you're not. And what's it take to be a made man, if you're going to use a mob reference in the sports writing world? When I think of some of the great sports writing, you start thinking about everybody, the ones that were truly great had a unique style, be it either a wry sense of humor, or an interesting take on what they could peel back from the story, be it the actual sports figure themselves, or the art of the game that they were covering, whatever the case might be. So when it comes to sports writing and covering the underbelly, what do you consider to be one of the more intriguing factors to get somebody to continue to read, other than just the facts about the game and who excelled and who sucked?
Yeah. I think for me, it was always who could get to the human element. The great writer Jim Murray from the LA Times was a hero of mine when I was young. And he always said that he wrote about people. He didn't write about things, that people want to read about people. And I always thought of that whenever I was trying to cover something, was like, if I'm at the Indy 500, I can't even change the oil in my own car.
Right.
The guy who's working on the engine, he might have a really interesting story. So you could write about auto racing in a way that makes it a little more universal. So I always admired the great writers who could do that, because let's face it, especially nowadays, we know the results. We know it in live time.
Right.
Watch games on Twitter and know exactly what's happening.
Right.
So the challenge is to really try to bring people into a world where they're not privy to being behind the scenes, or not privy to talking to these players and coaches, and just making it a universal type of story.
Let's go back. Let's go back a little bit. So early on in your career, what was your first big sports moment that you covered? Like where you said to yourself, "Okay, this is
Don't blow
big.
it.
This is big. This is big. This is a big sports moment, and I got to get it right."
Well, I think I started after a couple internships. I started at the Cincinnati Post. I had been there in 1987. I started full time in '89, and I was kind of put on the Bengals beat as the backup, the second writer on the beat. And so all of a sudden, I was around an NFL team on a day-to-day basis, and not only that, but a team that I grew up there, so right across the river from Cincinnati. So all of a sudden, I went from like knowing, reading and hearing about these guys to like all of a sudden I'm writing about them on a day-to-day basis. And so that was kind of eye-opening to realize that, geez, a few years ago, I was just stumbling around in college like a fool. And now here I am, around an NFL team on a day-to-day basis. So it was a little disconcerting and like, are you really here? So I just learned to keep my mouth shut early on, watch the veteran reporters, learn from them, soak it up. And so, the NFL was a great indoctrination to a world that just, kept growing and growing the deeper I got into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What was your over the course of your career, what was your pinch me? I can't believe I'm watching this and covering it moment. What was that one moment where you were in awe that you were present and then realized, oh shit, now I got to write about it?
Well, I think,
and I know that covers a lot of territory and a lot of sports.
Yeah, there obviously some great athletes that I was fortunate to see, but in some games that stick out. But really, I think the event that really struck me more than any was covering the Olympics. I was lucky enough. The dispatch was great to me. They sent me to Sydney, Australia for the Sydney Olympics in 2000.
That's nice.
I went to the Salt Lake Olympics and the Winter Olympics, and then I went to Athens, Greece. Oh. And I just think being on a world stage like that, where you have just people from all over the place coming together, and the atmosphere is so overwhelming. It's such a different experience in person. I notice when I don't cover the Olympics now, I see it on TV. It's just a show. It's a TV show, the way it's packaged and presented.
Right.
When you're there in person, it's really an amazing scene to see everybody from around the world. You're sitting there in a press box and you have a guy in an African robe typing away about some athlete from his city in Africa that he's writing about, the same as you're writing about an athlete from Columbus who happened to be in the Olympics.
It's a small world, right?
Yeah. Really made you feel like
a writer's a writer, right? So.
Yeah. And it was really interesting.
Todd.
The press conferences were fantastic. You'd get these the different press corps from around the world. They would treat their athletes much differently than even in the U.S. I mean, some of them were just brutal. the way they would just grill these people. The most famous Olympic question that I was aware of that I wasn't present for, but somebody failed in some event. I forget what country it was, and the question from that country's reporter was, "You are a national disgrace. Please respond."
Nice.
Wow.
So people think the American reporters are tough. They had to see some of the.
You are a national disgrace, and when you get home, you will be murdered.
Yeah, well, that might have been.
How do you feel about that?
True.
Who knows, especially in soccer, right?
Yeah, right. Seriously. Speaking of the press box, we got an interesting question, and I knew that some OSU stuff would pop up here, but this is ancient history, OSU. So Jamie Sanfilippo wants to know the OSU Miami game, the national championship game. Was it pass interference, and what did the guys in the press box say or think at that particular time? I'm a Buckeye fan, and I was there, but I always want to know what the rest of the world thought in that moment.
Well, I got to tell you, I was in that press box, and that is sports writers talk about deadlines the way they did in Jaws, where they were comparing their scars.
Yeah.
And that game is one of the all-timers in terms of deadline, just insanity. It was so late at night.
Oh, yeah.
Double overtime. It was back and forth. One of the greatest games that you can witness. So I know in the moment, it wasn't like I didn't know if I judged it, whether it was an accurate call. I just know that at the one hand, we thought the game was over, and I was trying to file my story. There were fireworks going off. Miami was celebrating. And so then they changed it. And then next thing you know, your whole story's changing. You're looking at your watch.
There's a flag in the end zone.
Looking back, I thought it was pass interference, but it obviously wasn't, right? The call was made, and the Buckeyes took advantage of it and won the game.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it was just too chaotic to even. I don't think anybody around us was saying, "Well, was that pass interference or not?" I think they were more like thinking, "Like, oh Christ, what am I going to write now?" Because things were just happening so fast.
Scrap all that.
What was
I do remember one thing about that play that's really crazy, that Sean Taylor, the safety, the great safety for the Hurricanes, unfortunately later in the NFL, he was murdered. But in that play, he threw his helmet off in celebration. And when it came down, we later found out it cracked, and he had to go off the field because he didn't have a helmet. And the very next play, Ohio State scored right up the middle.
Oh,
He was on the field. Not that they wouldn't have anyway, but it was just one of those great little details that happen in a game like that.
Yeah.
Those things are like Tolstoy novels or something.
Yeah, the fate sometimes weaves a very strange little web of circumstances.
That was just an incredible. Both sides. There were so many great plays. Just what a game. That's one of
That was a great game.
I was at that game. Jamie, who asked the question, was at that game. I was at that game with my college roommate, Greg DeTore. That was just, it was incredible. It was incredible. So the consensus basically is, I don't know if Jamie got a satisfactory answer.
Well, I think a lot of it,
field stands.
You get down to Florida, the people down there are going to say, they're going to say it one way. And
of course they're going to say.
And that's what's great about sports, right? And I do feel like I liked it better back then when there wasn't the instant replay and it took 20 minutes to figure out what happened. We lived with the human decision and you played on. Players, whether it was a right call or not, you play on, and they did.
I like the fact that our listeners are actually doing my job for me. I like this question from Eric Osbeck. Did you ever have a gonzo journalist moment, a la Hunter S. Thompson, where the backstory to the actual game, was more interesting than what you wrote about instead?
Well, I did come out of a bar in New Orleans one time when the sun was coming up, and
who hasn't?
And there was some stuff to write the next day. So there are some gonzo moments. I think the old adage is no whining in the press box. You got to play hurt. If you're going to play the game at night, you got to play the game during the game. So there was always a respect that certain writers had for each other, that they knew if those guys could play late into the night, if they could also do the job the next day. So there was definitely some times where it felt like you had to check the skyline to figure out where am I, because I've been on the road too long.
Right.
And who's actually playing?
Did you fall into the cliche, the stereotype, the cigarette smoking, cigar chomping, whiskey drinking sports writer who?
Well, it wasn't so much the whiskey, like I told you, but it was beer. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of miles with the beer involved, but there are cliches. What I think I noticed about sports writing, it started to change when the clothing started to change. I think early in my career, you'd show up, you practically had bowling shoes on, and some mustard stained shirt. And next thing you know, TV started getting involved. Guys started doing appearances, and the clothes started getting better and better, and then by the time I retired, I didn't even know what I was wearing. I was like, this is crazy. I got into this so I wouldn't have to wear a tie. Now I look around and it's like all these guys are sharply dressed. I mean, what happened to sports writing?
Going back just 1 second to the OSU Miami game, we said that, I don't know if Jamie got a satisfactory answer. And you said, imagine if you're from Florida. My brother-in-law just chimed in, who lives in Florida. Worst call in college football. There you go, right?
That's what makes it great. I mean, when you think about it, all sports is basically an argument.
It is. It basically
gets down to, right?
It basically is.
In many respects, that's what the podcast is about. Just telling stories like this, arguing in a bar, kicking it around. I mean, that's what makes fun.
I like that. I like it because I'm kind of the next generation of media, and it's fun to hear the older generation tell these stories, because I mean, I don't think anything has gotten crazier, but nowadays, social media, you already hear everything right away. You either post about it or blog about it or somebody tweets about it. But there's this whole catalog of all these cool stories that's kind of off the record that you tell among us media folks about XYZ, so and so, having to. Splash water on them and get them up to the microphone and that kind of thing. And there's just this rich history of, like you said, almost this oral history of getting it done. Aside from even just how what went out on the field.
It's really a reflection of how the world changes. I mean, the one thing that I want to do with the show is not bemoan the fact that, in the old days, the world changes. More power to the sports writers, the media today. They're doing a job that's in many ways much tougher than I had to do when I was younger. Because when I filed my story at night, I was finished. There wasn't, you didn't have to worry about tweeting and breaking things in the moment. Yeah. So, so it's not really like, bemoaning the change, but, one of the reasons access is in the title of the show is that's probably one of the biggest changes, now compared to when I started in the late 80s, was the access that you had was so much greater. I mean, it was just so much more, I'll give you an example. Like, I started with the Bengals beat right out of college in the late 80s. Mike Brown, the owner of the team, he gives you his home phone number.
Nice.
And Sam Weiss, you're at training camp, and Sam Weiss's room is right down the hall from you. If you had a question at night, you just go down and knock on his door. Boomer Esiason was the quarterback, and he would talk to the writers every day at his locker. Now you get the quarterback once a week, and it's 15 minutes, everybody in a press conference. You talk to Boomer at his locker, he would talk forever. At the point where at the end, he'd say, "You guys got enough?"
So I have a question.
Chance to talk to guys and develop a respect and a rapport and a trust.
Trust is big. Yeah. Like, sorry, John, you can ask a second. But we always joke about Dino. Like, I've got so much tape on Dino. Rolling tape, man. I could really bury him if I wanted. But
rolling tape on what? From this podcast?
From everything, dude.
From podcast? From radio? You got nothing on me, Hansberry.
All right.
Where as opposed to you.
That's right.
Okay, I think that, and that's the whole thing. Is it's just this kind of brotherhood, sisterhood, where we kind of there's this unspoken word of like, all right, you don't cross that line.
So you were talking about like talking to people in the locker room at their locker. In your career, who was the one athlete that you said, "I need a quote that's gold"? Who gave you every quote was gold?
Well, I mentioned Boomer. He was fantastic. Esiason was great. I'll give you a quick Boomer story. Here's how good of a media guy Boomer was. One time in the off season, one of the editors was filling in sports. He was in news and he had moved over. I guess the sports editor was on vacation. Anyway, this guy says, "Hey, I got a great story for you. I heard Boomer's playing softball." This is like in June, and I'm like, so what? I mean, so what? He's playing softball, and I'm like, just leave him alone. He's good to us during the season. Unless it's a news thing, we shouldn't bother him. Like, no, I couldn't talk my way out of it. So I had to go out to the softball complex. And so I'm sitting at the softball field waiting, and I see Boomer and this guy, Mark Pike, who played for the Bills, and he lived in Northern Kentucky. So Boomer and Mark Pike are walking over towards me. And from about 30 yards away, Boomer sees me and he says, "This is not a story." Like, he knew it wasn't a story, right? Right. He's not real happy that I'm there, but he comes over and he kind of is not happy. And then finally he goes, "What do you need?" And he sat down and I threw some softball questions at him.
No pun
turned him loose.
Exactly right.
He knew I had a job to do. He had better news judgment than the guy who told me to go do it.
And your boss.
He also knew I needed to get what I needed to get, provided it. We moved on. And he played shortstop as a left-hander, by the way.
That's weird. That's weird.
Interesting. In that same vein, I'm gonna piggyback on Whitney. Not so much as far as with gold, but who was the biggest asshole that you? I know that might be a big list.
Well, Bonds was tough. Barry Bonds was tough. And some guys just didn't want to play the game. Now in some ways we were pretty judgmental, right? If a guy wasn't cooperative, he's an ass. But maybe the guy just isn't comfortable talking to the media. But Bonds was just tough, and he would mess with you a little bit. I remember one time I was working in Columbus, and I went down to cover a Giants game at the Reds. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go see if I can get a one-on-one with Bonds just for the hell of it. And so I went over to his locker, and he started talking to me, and he started talking some more. And what I realized about 10 minutes into it was he was only talking to me to screw with the San Francisco writers. They were all standing over there looking over like, who is this guy? And why is Bonds talking to this guy? And he was just doing it to mess with them. So it was tough. I mean, sometimes coaches would be tough. Knight has a great reputation of being tough, but I always tried to be a little thoughtful in terms of, especially after a game, how would I feel if somebody come in and caught me in the moment? And I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily be easy talking. So as I got older, I got more understanding about that. When you were a younger reporter, I remember Lou Piniella, he blew me up a couple times, and it was kind of like disconcerting, I mean, but then you realized, actually he really likes writers, and you'd get along because it's almost like if you could take his wrath and come back for more, it was like an element of respect. And so, over time, it's like you build up a good rapport and a good relationship. So
yeah, I find this to be an interesting question to ask you now that you've had a chance to mellow and look back and reflect. I would have loved to ask you the same question in the middle of your career when you were just, if I were to say to you 20 years ago, who's the biggest dick you ever interviewed? I bet you would have had an answer like, lickety split. One, I got 5.
Well, I mean, I think in college basketball, I had a tough relationship with Bob Huggins at times. That wasn't my beat all the time, but there were times when Huggins and I didn't get along. But
he's a pun.
And over time, it's like, over time it got to be fine. I see Huggins now, it's totally fine. But when you were younger, it was, you felt like you were being tested, and maybe you didn't really have the perspective to understand the context about where they're coming from, in terms of what you're trying to ask about or write about. So you just learn how to deal with it. And I think a lot of that stuff lessened when the cameras became more prevalent, and that's the flip side of less access. Now the access is so controlled that everything's on camera. And the last thing a player or coach wants to be is, blows up and then he or she is on Twitter, and it's like a Karen moment, right?
Right.
Well, those Karen moments used to happen behind the scenes, and
nobody knew about it.
It was just be like, dust yourself off. And here's the thing: if you wrote something that was very critical, or was a news story that you knew somebody was not going to be happy about, you had to show up. You had to go back the next day and be there, because if you're expecting things out of them, that they should have a chance to, to plead their case or make their point, or just tell you off if that was the case. So that was another thing you respected. You respected the writers who they could throw a fastball, but they would show up the next day too.
Nice. Another question from one of our listeners. Do you agree that this year has proven that fans in the stands make the game? It's boring and uninspiring to not see and hear the stands going crazy.
Yeah, I really do think that's a great point. I went to the Ohio State Rutgers football game this year, and it was just it was bizarre. It was like futuristic, like where in the hell is everybody? 100,000 seat stadium, 120, whatever, and you look around and you could, like when Justin Fields would clap his hands on for the sound, you could hear it.
You could hear the clap. You could hear the clap. Yeah.
And if I see like a college basketball game on TV now, it's just like, it's like bad minor league basketball. In terms of college basketball, you need the arena, the gym, the people, the screaming, they're going crazy, the fans, the students. It just really doesn't.
So would you say it's missing
across the same?
It doesn't come across the same, but you also think in respects to the game, it's part of the adrenaline factor for the players as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, you could feel it. I mean, especially in certain stadiums and certain arenas, it really did have definite effect on the momentum of games. You could just, especially if you go down in the field in certain places, like in a football game, the intensity is just so fantastic. The noise, it's like being in a rock concert in the front row, right? It's just a different experience. And
Well,
I've always felt that way with the NFL. It just doesn't transfer to television the same way.
Yeah.
Like if you're on the field, you see the speed and the size of these guys, it really actually takes your breath away at times. And then you see it on television, it's just real flat. There's no perspective. It's like you got to hold the fish up against something to give it some scale.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because like when I was watching this past season, when I was watching when hockey came back and they were in the bubble and played in the bubble, as long as I didn't see the stands around me, as long as they stayed on the ice, I started to forget that there was no people there and actually focused on the game itself. So I have to say personally that while I do prefer a stadium to be packed and everything and so forth and so on, see a bunch of people, there have been times where I have kind of forgotten that the fans weren't there and actually did focus on the game. Same with with baseball as well.
Mm-hmm.
My eyes were on the field or on the ice. Wherever it might be.
It's a great point
Nobody goes
about
to baseball games anyway.
Too. Just seeing, if you just concentrate on the rink itself, it is different. But if you're able to see beyond that,
but if I were at the game,
everything.
if I were actually at the game and sitting in the shoe and being one of the lone survivors that's after that's sitting around there, that would seem very surreal and weird. I think I'd be more obsessed with what wasn't around me than what was on the field. So back to some of your career as well.
Career, that's just a word that makes you sound old, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
I guess that's what we are, man. Like mid-50s. I'm talking about the old days. It's like this is what happened, my man?
You still have a career. I mean, you're still doing something. You've got one podcast that's going on as we speak, 1 Degree Greater. You still work for the OSU Alumni Magazine. You're starting another podcast, Press Box Access. You still have a career. You're just shifting with the times, much like we are as well. And I think you're still just probably discovering things about yourself.
Yeah, I discovered. You know what I've discovered? Naps are great.
Naps are good.
Naps are awesome.
Like, and I wake up now when I used to get in. So
and
that's what I've discovered.
And maybe now, as you're getting into the podcast world, when you're writing as a columnist or a sports writer or whatever you might have been writing out, you write in a certain perspective and give an opinion. Now you're interviewing people. Now you're actually talking to people face to face. You're able to go a little deeper. And is that intimidating, challenging, fascinating?
No, I'm always just been, I'm a very curious person, and so I really enjoy the interview part of being a,
it's my favorite part. It's my favorite.
And that's what it's helped me with, transitioning into podcasting. It's still storytelling. That's what we're doing here, right? It's like we're sitting around telling stories. And so for me, whenever I was doing stories over the years, whether it was in sports or not, just talking to some person, getting their story, it was always thrilling and educating. And it was like I used to sit in the airport and you would see all these people coming and going. I would say to myself, what's that person's story, or what's that family? There's, happiness, there's sadness, there's all these things going on in an airport, a terminal. And I would just imagine that. And then as a journalist all those years, you got paid to go ask questions about people. And it was amazing how many people would just invite you into their lives. When you're a sports writer all those years, everybody assumes like it was always the biggest moments, the biggest, greatest. It's Michael Jordan, it's this and that. But sometimes it was just a really small story, small moments that leave the most effect on you, and things that you remember aren't necessarily the things that people think you would remember.
Yeah, and maybe not so much the smaller moments that I want to ask you about right now, because you're right. There are some small things. I've said it on this podcast a dozen times that our guests have run the gamut from A to Z, and everybody has a story. It's up to us to kind of dig a little deeper and find out what that story might be. So, in respects to what you've done as a writer and now a podcaster, but I'm going to focus once again on the writing. What's the lamest thing you ever had to cover? Now you talking. We're talking about
not counting this, not counting risky business.
We were there for the greatest. And
I mean, I've written a lot of lame things. You know, there.
No, all right. You know, I'm sure when you judge your columns from 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest, I'm sure you sent in some 5s and some 4s.
Hey man, stand up doubles or a hit by pitch, still getting on base, you know.
But as far as like, yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, you didn't write about putt in the 80s.
You know,
come on.
I one time taught a sports writing class at Ohio University, and I jokingly said, it was sort of a joke. I said the real challenge in sports writing is not to write a great story; it's to write an adequate story when you're hungover.
That could be my new mantra. In general, but you didn't answer the question. What's the lamest thing you ever had to cover?
Well, I did go to the state fair and write about cornhole once. And wrote a story about the guy was known as the King of Sling.
The King of Sling,
and he lost. He got
the king was dethroned.
Long live the king!
Did the miracle on ice. Also, I saw the King of Sling get upset at the state fairgrounds here in Columbus.
Oh my gosh!
Great moment in sports history.
Who knew? Who knew that you would be right there at that particular moment where
you just never know, right?
And who dethroned him? Did you interview that person?
No, I think I was more enthralled by the idea that the King of Sling had been beaten. So I think I wrote about the king going down.
The king.
I can't do credit to the victor, but the King of Sling,
Heavy is
that person needed to answer some damn questions. Now I'm telling you,
no doubt.
heavy is the head that wears the crown, as they say. Oh my God. Who was the most humble person you ever interviewed that was over the course of the years? You know, somebody who could have been, based on their athletic prowess and what they brought to whatever their sport might have been, could have been a huge egomaniac, but actually was probably the most humble and grateful for where he was and what he had to accomplish, and somebody that you got to speak to.
Well, one guy to come to mind, I used to write a lot of baseball in Cincinnati in the early 90s, and Tony Gwynn was great.
Oh, yeah.
He was very, very humble and just a very easygoing, just a kind of a kind soul. I think some of his teammates, almost resented the fact that he was always doing interviews. Like sometimes guys would talk a lot and they would get almost like criticized behind their back for being like, they'd call them moths, like moths to the light,
Moths to the
flame. That's not why Tony was talking. Tony was talking because he was a nice person. He was a hell of a player. And so much of baseball is about talking about baseball.
Yeah.
And
Tony really talk about baseball. Right?
Tony was a great guy like that. Greg Maddux, the pitcher for the Braves, was also just a very soft-spoken, just even-keel guy, just very great, analytics about what he was doing on the mound. And so, I always felt like, people say, well, what's so-and-so like? And it's like, you're catching them in very contrived moments for the most part. If somebody was an asshole to you when you were doing an interview, it doesn't mean they were an asshole in real life. If somebody was a nice person, doesn't mean they were necessarily a great person away from that setting. You take 53 people on a football team in the NFL, you take 50 people off the street and put them in a room. There's going to be some jerks. There's going to be some nice guys. There's going to be some people that are frauds. And, when you're on a beat and you're around one team every day, you know who's who, and you learn who to avoid and who to talk to and who to deal with. So they're just people. In the end, they're people. And if you treat them like that with respect in good times and bad, I think you had a better working relationship with them.
Do they still have the same personnel? Sorry, Dino. Do they still, even though, things have changed and, Twitter and such, is there still, a guy on the beats for the Reds and that kind of thing? Or is it just, is there one guy that covers everything?
No, there's still typically beats. The city will have, like my great friend Aaron Portzline has been covering the Blue Jackets since the
Right.
day they started. Cities will have a person assigned to a beat. That's one thing. Like in my career, I really didn't do much of that. Like I had the fortune of, it was either doing columns or I was doing profiles or I was doing big events, and the dispatch was great. They would send me to different things, so I was like parachuting into different environments. Which is one of the reasons I did the show, was because I know a lot of writers from around the country because I was doing a lot of different sports.
Yeah, sure.
But then you take a guy like Hal McCoy at the Dayton Daily News, who's covered the Reds since 1974, day after day. I mean, I have a ton of respect for any writer that can do that, because that's that's much more difficult in some ways than what I was doing.
Right.
What I was doing had its own challenges. You're showing up like a smoke jumper and trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. But, doing it day after day after day with the same people, I mean, that takes a real skill and a talent, especially like a baseball writer.
Sure.
If you could go back before your time, before you were actually doing what you do, because to do what you do, obviously you have to have an affection and an appreciation for sports history. Who do you wish you could go back in time and have a one-on-one with?
I would think, when I was growing up, it was always baseball. So for me, the baseball in its heyday in the 50s, with Mays, Aaron,
DiMaggio.
DiMaggio was more 40s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
But I think probably with regards to baseball, be Babe Ruth.
Ruth?
Be back in the day with Babe Ruth in the 20s, he was more homers than any other team in the league. He was making more than the president. It's like the Babe he was the guy, right? And he was the first mega superstar in the roaring 20s to really raise the level of all sport. So there's so many great Babe Ruth stories. I think it's probably Babe Ruth.
Could you outdrink him? Could you outdrink him?
No, not that what I've heard. Now, I will say this. Now that you've got my mind going, besides Babe Ruth, I think it had to be Muhammad Ali.
Ali.
That's what
It's got to be Ali.
Yes.
I mean, Ali trumps Ruth, and now that I think, because Ali transcended sport, and not only was he the great boxer, but he, for what he stood for, his principles, what he gave up, what he fought
people
for,
together.
hit the whole arc of his story and his life. I came in the late 80s, and I missed Ali, and I wish I had covered those great fights, the Thrilla in Manila, the Rumble in the Jungle, Ali Frazier won, I think Ali, because I know writers who did cover Ali. The stories they tell. I mean, actually one of them on Press Box Access, Tom Archdeacon from Dayton, he's in the Boxing Hall of Fame. He covered several Ali's fights towards the end of his career, and the stories are unbelievable. And then talk about the access and just a great person to deal with. There was never a dull moment when you're around Ali, from what I hear.
Yeah, I just I think about I asked you that question from a sports perspective. I always think about if I had a chance to sit down with a famous writer who no longer is living, or a classic actor who is no longer living. Who would I like to sit across from? Singer. I would have loved to. I would love to have talked to Frank Sinatra. I would have loved to sit across from Dean Martin.
With the Rat Pack, you can drink a whiskey with the Rat Pack. That'd be all right.
I would have loved to have sat across and had dinner with Hemingway or John Steinbeck. So, it's interesting to ask you about who you want to be associated with sports-wise that you never would have had the opportunity to do so. What is your favorite sport out of all the sports? I mean, that you personally. I want to say you seem like you lean towards baseball.
Well, it always was baseball for the longest time, and then it was really basketball. College basketball in particular.
Oh, Kentucky, yeah.
Well, not even so much that, but just I covered a lot. I covered Xavier and some UC, and even in Columbus, I was covering a lot of different basketball things. But the sport I probably wrote more about was football, especially in the later years of my career. I was doing a lot of college football, regionally and nationally, but also the NFL, where I was doing a lot of Bengals and Browns, and And so I was having weekends towards the end where I was like going to a Big Ten game on Saturday and then going to Cleveland the next day on Sunday for an NFL game. So, I was around football a lot. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite sport. It's just, to me, the most fascinating in terms of, we know it's not good for you.
Yeah.
Brain damage.
Right.
Yeah.
We know it's brutal, and yet it's, you can't turn your eyes away. There's something about it and being around the NFL teams and seeing what these guys did, to play the game and how big some of them were and how little some of them were.
Yeah.
Again, if you're on the field, it's Roman gladiators. And so
Yeah.
I think football was probably not my favorite sport, but probably the one I was always most fascinated by.
How much do you think money has changed professional sports?
That's the same as it's changed anything, I mean,
I think back to when, Terry Bradshaw would talk about, how he had to sell cars or insurance in the off season to kind of make ends meet. And that, his bonus, I think his signing bonus was $100,000 that was spread out over, I don't know how many payments, and he talks about how he wishes that he was making the kind of change that, people make now in the NFL, and so forth and so on. So has, money, they say the root of all evil. Has that evil infiltrated professional sports to a point where it's changed the games?
Well, it has changed the games in terms of just the way it's presented to the public. I mean, pretty much every game's on television. Games take 4 hours to play now. They're played late at night when I want to go to bed. But the athletes and, the money they make, well, who should be paying that money? If there's that much money being generated, shouldn't the players be getting it? I mean, there is no game without the players.
You talk about college?
Well, yeah, I mean, even in college in that regard, right? I mean, that's a thing that's changing and evolving.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to see changes to that.
That's a whole other podcast.
Pro sports, money has changed the game, but I've seen articles from 1908 in the Sporting News where people were complaining about ball players making too much money.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just the same as I've seen articles in Sports Illustrated in the 1950s where parents were complaining about their kids being overweight and out of shape in the 1950s. So, I mean, a little bit of it is, it's crazy, the money these guys are making. But if you think about like in PGA golf, there's 130 guys on tour.
Right.
How many people on the planet? There's 130. Right.
They can play that game.
I mean, that's tiny. I mean, that's like minuscule. That doesn't mean they deserve all that money. I mean,
maybe that would have been
firefighters and healthcare workers. They deserve the money.
Maybe that would have been a better question. Does everybody that makes that kind of money deserve that kind of money?
Clint Eastwood said deserves got nothing to do with it. So
right. That's what Clint Eastwood said.
I just get back to like if whatever you're doing is generating that much income, I would think that the people who participate in the game, they deserve. That's why you're watching. You're watching.
I mean, it's a skill sports, right? You get paid a certain amount of money because you're skilled at writing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the same thing with sports, right?
I ran cross country in high school. Nobody cared. Nobody came and watched me run around.
Yeah, right.
Go in the woods. I mean, so did I deserve to get paid the same as an NFL player? No. So it depends on.
You're not getting your head bashed in.
Yeah, right. There's a reason that I was running.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. Babe Ruth was making more money than the president.
And I asked him why, and he said, because I had a better year.
That's right.
And he was right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but money's changed really since free agency started, erupting in the mid to late 70s.
Right.
This is what we've known now for 40, 50 years. So, I mean, it's almost like an old debate. I mean, of course, they're making ridiculous amounts of money, of course, but you almost have to take that out of the equation to really try to enjoy it, because you don't go to the movie and start complaining about how much Jack Nicholson's making.
No.
Right.
So, But I think what happens in sports is, we all can throw a ball. We all can do that somewhat.
Not all of us.
And the blend between just a sports star, just an actor, and it is it's washing away, that line, fine line. They're forcing themselves in your home all the time,
Well,
whether
I
it's
mean, I
on
think it's
Dancing
more
with the Stars or
entertainment,
whatever
right?
else. Right. Yeah.
Right. I think there used to be that sport was more about sport, and now it's more about
Celebrity.
entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it didn't matter if you went to the ball game on a Tuesday and it was a dull game, but the sun was out and you're with your buddies having a cold one. You know, it was a good time. Now it's like, oh, that game sucked. It was not an entertaining game. We need more offense. You know, let's put a guy on second, or let's speed the clock up. Let's make
Oh,
it.
I hate that shit.
all that type of thing.
So
And,
it just changes. You know, I think that has to do with the money.
and the cost that kind of trickles down to the fans. I mean, what was a Super Bowl ticket? $7,000 to go sit in the. My sister, who lives in Tampa, said it was $7,000 to sit in the nosebleed
Yeah.
of an empty, not an empty stadium, but a safe distanced stadium down in Florida. $7,000 to go see the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
Can you imagine if you bought a ticket for $7,000 and they
Right.
tested your temperature at the gate and you couldn't get in? That would suck.
Hey, the weekend was pretty good, though.
Sportswriting. Somebody asked me if I wanted to go see the Blue Jackets game, and I'm like, "Why?" I'm like, "Buy a ticket." Like they used to pay me to go.
Right.
They're like going to pay to go. So, I mean, tickets are only worth what people are willing to pay, right? In the end. So, you know, again, I saw Springsteen in '81 for $12. You know, so,
Hey, that's nice.
you know, but going to a movie then was $2. So, oh my God, my dad was saying, I can't believe you're paying $12 to go to a concert.
Right.
Yeah, it's all
You can't even
relative.
park for $12 now.
right.
No, you really can't. You really can't. One more sports question from Jamie. He asked, first of all, if you're a Baseball Hall of Fame voter. Interesting question. And will Clemens, Big Mac, Bonds, Sosa ever get in? Why do so many sports writers not realize it was just the time?
That's a great question. The first part, I'm not a Baseball Hall of Fame writer, a voter. You had to have 10 consecutive years as a member of the Baseball Writers. I think I was up to 7 or 8. And when I left Cincinnati and was no longer doing baseball, I kind of lost that. So, which is fine. You know, I wasn't around baseball as much then. You know, the Hall of Fame thing is an age-old question, right? I mean, I know from my ties and years in Cincinnati, Pete Rose, that question never goes away. You know, I think, you know, the Hall of Fame's a club, right? And it's a club and it's got its own little rules. And, you know, I mean, if I'm in broadcast journals, I'm saying, why, and I cover baseball, I'm saying, why can't I vote? You know, why is it only the writers? You know, and it's just one of those things that's evolved the way it is. And I think the question about why can't people see it for what it was, you know, the steroid era of baseball. I think part of that is it gets back to like stats are so important part of baseball in particular. They are one way that you can compare eras, and I think they got so out of whack that it turned off a lot of older fans and a lot of the writers, and so it gets kind of personal, you know, in that regard. And I think you know.
Yeah.
I think, you know, they ought to be in, and you put an asterisk on their plaque and you say, this is what they did, you know, and this is what happened.
I mean, how many times
in their time, they were the best. You know, I mean, the drug testing issue is fascinating. You can go into every sport pretty much and start debating people. And it's always been there, right? The ancient Greeks used to build statues of people that fail what they had as drug testing. And the reason they built a statue is to shame them and to tell them, the people, like, this is what they did. So drug cheating and that argument, that goes back to the ancient Greeks.
Oh, you're welcome.
But yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, right.
I was watching that 30 for 30 McGuire Sosa summer. I forget what the name of the documentary was. And you're right. Every time, I'm an older baseball fan, every time I would see their face, I would go, you fucking cheater. These fuckers were cheating. And I got so angry watching the documentary because they were so heralded at the time. Yeah. And knowing what we know now, I'm just like, you know what? That whole fucking run, that entire summer, it was bullshit.
I remember that.
And when Hank Aaron passed away, what was everybody saying? The true home run king.
Yeah.
The true home run king.
Yeah.
I used to say that pro wrestling was more honest because it told you it was
right. Fake. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Because, you know, we are fake, right? And you accept it, and then you go enjoy it. You know, guy pulls out a chair. All right, you know. I don't
right.
know. I, mean, I
That's
just
fun.
feel like the drug testing issue, you can go on. You could do 9 shows about that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Well, I'm sure you'll cover a lot of those bases in some of your podcasts moving forward. Before we go, Todd, the boys and I discussed a lightning round with you.
Uh-oh.
Yes or no questions. We're going to go round robin. Each one of us will have one question. It'll go Whitney, Hansberry, me, Whitney, Hansberry, me, Whitney, Hansberry, me. You can answer only yes or no. No added editorials. No yes buts. Yes.
Can I ask for my attorney? Can I at least
Plead the fifth.
We'll start with we'll have 3 questions apiece, starting with Whitney with his first yes or no question for Todd.
Pete
This is
Rose.
for me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
To
Pete
you.
Rose, Hall of Fame?
Yes.
Hansberry.
NFL should adopt the XFL's 3-point extra point rule.
No.
Me.
That's definitive.
No extra editorials. Me. Do you think Tom Brady made a deal with Satan?
No, Tom Brady is Satan.
Okay, that was an okay editorial.
Yes or no question. Whitney.
In hockey, is offsides a dumb rule?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hansberry.
Cheerleaders at Major League Baseball games.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
My second question you already answered. Do you think Tom Brady is Satan?
Yes.
Yes. you already answered. Whitney, third question.
Has the DH ruined baseball?
No.
Okay.
I'm breaking the rules. Best American Woody. Woody Hayes, Woody Harrelson, Woody from Toy Story.
It's got to be Woody Hayes. It's Columbus. Sorry, Woody Hayes.
And my last question. Giselle Bundchen. Is she really a woman or just a good-looking man?
Yes.
I got one more. Though.
All right, okay, go Whitney.
Cornhole and Major League Sports someday?
Yes.
The King Slinger is coming back. Yes.
Call back.
He'll be the commissioner.
Yeah, I'll be there. The return of the King of Sling. The King is back.
One bonus question. Will you ever come back on Whiskey Business?
Yes.
Yes.
Press.
All right.
Oh Lord.
That's fine.
Oh man.
Giselle Bundchen.
You got something about Tom Brady though, man. I'm starting to worry about you. I think your therapist needs to hear about this.
I don't know what it is. It's and I even called my mother out on it because my mother was on the podcast and I had to remind her that when she was on the podcast, she actually bitched about Tom Brady. She said that Tom Brady made too much money. Why do they pay?
I do remember that.
And she was bitching about Tom Brady.
All right.
Tom Brady's down in Tampa and playing for the Buccaneers. And she actually said to me in the conversation, that Tom Brady, he's something, isn't he, honey? And I went, Ma, really? Really? Do you want me to bring up don't play that tape. Don't play that tape.
We've got it on tape, Mom.
Yeah, we do.
Where you said the Spurgeon thing. I'm just, it basically boils down to not so much a hatred for Tom Brady, a little bit, but the fact that when he was with the Patriots, they tied the Steelers for the amount of Super Bowls won. And it really comes down to something that petty. And I don't care.
Hey, it's sports. Nothing's petty.
I don't mind petty. And I also, to what Hansberry said earlier, too, the one thing I do miss, you're right, Hansberry, about social media and so forth and so on. During the entire Super Bowl, I was on a text thread with Jamie Sanfilippo and about 13 other guys from the Columbus Italian Club, and everybody was in the moment texting and talking about the game. That's what I miss. I miss not being able to do that right then and there, to maybe go into a bar the next day or the day after that and talk about the Super Bowl in length and depth about it, as opposed to just blowing it all there that night while you're sitting on your couch. And then the next day, if you were to see the same people in a bar or a restaurant.
You already said everything you already had to say.
I kind of miss that camaraderie after the game and the discussions and the debates. But every once in a while, you can still get into a nice, good argument about sports.
Well, that's what you get on Press Box Access. See that pitch I just gave you?
There you go.
Great.
Good transition.
A nice pitch. Press Box Access, which is hard to say 3 times fast, especially when you've been drinking. Debuts February the 17th. It'll be every 2 weeks on the Evergreen Podcast Network. Todd Jones will be your host. 1 Degree Greater. That podcast is currently on as we speak as well. What's that one all about?
Yeah, we did a podcast at Ohio State with young alumni, just telling their stories, different alums who are out in the world. Once you get out of school and real world hits, what's it like? So, check them out. There's some pretty cool alums out there doing some good things.
Excellent. So you can check that out as well. Todd, man, thank you so much, buddy.
Hey, thank you. I owe you guys some whiskey. I'm not a whiskey drinker. I'm a beer guy.
Yeah.
But I'd be glad to get some whiskey sent your way. This has been a lot of fun. I really, really do appreciate it.
Well, we wish you nothing but success. And who knows if everything falls, if all the stars align, we may be part of your family here in a little bit as well. Not your actual family, your wife and
that would be awkward.
That would be weird. That would be weird. But
there's nothing in this house. We're just stuck here, right? So
bunch of fake books.
We've done
these books. I got the crayons. We can just get down. We start coloring.
I just hope the next time you're on, you're actually here, because Todd and I live about 4 blocks away from one another, and we're doing this podcast remotely. You're like 4 blocks down the street. So, but things are the way they are, and until they get fixed properly and safely, we'll do the best that we can. Our guest has been Todd Jones. Hansberry, a little more business before we say goodbye.
That's right. Thanks for checking out Whiskey Business. Again, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, thanks. Feel free to subscribe and share this podcast right now while you're thinking about it. I'd wait, but it's getting late. I'd wait for you to do that. But if you are listening to this on your favorite podcasting app, don't forget to go check us out on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube, Whiskey Business with Dino Tripodis, because we'll let you know when we do live streams like this, and you could be a part of it, commenting and asking questions along the way. And if you're finding us on Facebook for the first time, go download us, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. We've got an archive of 5 years of episodes. Plus, you can find all of everything you need to know right here at whiskeybusinesspod.com, including videos and handsome bios of Dino and I, and a creepy artsy pic of John Whitney.
Hey,
once again, put those pictures back up, Whitney, because
that's too many steps. That's
black and white, please.
Too many steps.
Right.
Yeah, I want to see that black and white thing again.
My name is John Whitney, and I dance.
Who was the Mike Myers character on SNL?
Was it
Diener?
You make me
This has been a
sad.
great appearance on Sprockets.
Exactly. All right, guys. All right.
Okay, and some of the great comments. A lot of people. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. You asked some great questions for our guest Todd Jones tonight. Thank you so much. I'm going down some of the other fun comments as well for people that just tuned in and said hello. Sarah Miller says, "You mean you don't like the cardboard fan cutouts and soundboard cheering at the stadiums?" No, I actually don't. But people paid big money to put their cutouts into the Super Bowl as well. Great shirt, Todd. A lot of people loved your shirt tonight, Todd.
Hey, it was a great university to me. I'm really proud of my alma mater, and
College.
The NFL should take college football's OT rules. Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I actually agree with that.
A little bit of long live the king. I imagine the king of sling that you were talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people just saying that tonight was a great show and that you guys are fun. Deb Birch says you guys are fun. Sarah says great show. This was fun. Everybody seemed to have a good time tonight. I know that we had a good time tonight. The guest bottle, our 154th bottle on the podcast, Filibuster, out of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the double oaked, first in charred casks, and then rested in California wine barrels, somewhere between $49 and $53 a bottle. But I want to thank my brother-in-law, Mike Driss, for giving me this bottle over Thanksgiving, a couple of Thanksgivings ago. I don't know that I would have paid the $53 for it, but it's good. It's good. And if you pick it up and you won't be disappointed in what it's got going on. A little bit of vanilla, a lot of caramel to me, but a fine pour, and that's all the whiskey business really is about. A good pour and a good conversation, which we've had with Todd Jones. So thank you, everybody who tuned in on Facebook Live, YouTube Live. Todd Jones, once again, 21721 Press Box Access on the Evergreen Network. I'll be chatting with you after the podcast as well, my friend. Thank you so much for being who you are and doing what you do. And ladies and gentlemen, until the next bottle, see ya.
Hey, Dino, go ahead and do a real quick tease, and then I'll get us off.
Okay. Quick tease for the podcast. All right.
We're still on the air.
I understand that, and that's why
Don't say anything disparaging.
I'm not saying anything
about Jamie.
Yeah. All right. Hi, I'm Dieter Tripodis. Tonight on Whiskey Business. If you've ever thought about sitting in the front row but couldn't, how about the men who did? No, not the men. There might be women too. That's not right. That's not right.
Let's fix that.
Let's fix that. Let's not fix. Let's fix that. Let's fix that. Oh my gosh! Thanks, guys. By the way, for putting this on me right at the minute, right here.
You knew it was happening.
Yeah, I know what's happening right here, right now. Okay. Tonight on Whiskey Business, what's it like to have the best seat in the house when it comes to sports? Todd Jones joined us tonight on Whiskey Business.
There you go. Okay, we're going off the air. Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Now you're going.